So blame YouTube. So how did all this begin? How did this idea to go sailing and live on a sailboat come to be? Well, it started off pretty innocently. I was thumbing through YouTube videos on my TV. It was early in the year. It was right around the time for the beginning of AT through hikes, the Appalachian Trail through hikes, and I was looking for videos on that just to follow some, see if anybody was making videos. And I stumbled across a sailing video, and then I came across another one, and I became intrigued by it, and I watched a few more, and then I started looking for a little bit more, and then I came across Delos, and came across Sailing Sophisticated Lady, and I think the La Vagabonds were just starting off then, and watched them and became interested in that idea. It was entertaining. Then I shared it with Stephanie. We started watching them together, and she was intrigued by it. And then we came across Gone with the Winds just when they were looking for their sailboat, and got even more intrigued by it and started looking for more videos of more people doing exactly that. And the reason it intrigued us is that, one, we love the islands. One of our favorite things to do is go down to the Caribbean. We've been to the majority of the islands down there. We knew that we were getting to that point in our life where we were going to be empty nesters. And then we'd have a house much too big for what we need. And it was time to get on and do something differently. And we were recognizing that our life was in a rut, that we were doing the same thing day in and day out without a whole heck of a lot of variety. We wanted to get out of that rut. We recognized that we needed to do or wanted to do something, but we didn't know what. But at that point in time, we weren't convinced that, hey, let's just go ahead and just drop everything and take off. The more we watched the sailing videos, the more it tweaked our interest in that might be a possibility. That spring, we took my son and a couple of his friends on a cruise for their senior year, just before graduation. It was during that cruise that we met other cruisers, sailors. We came away from that with the idea that this is something we need to look into further. That's where it began. A recognition that we needed to change our life. We wanted to do something different. So we go from there and start the adventure. So blame YouTube. April 15th, 2017. Headed to go look at sailboats. If I'm going to get started on this adventure to sell off everything, move on to a sailboat, I guess perhaps I need to start looking for a sailboat. And where do you go to do that when you live in North Georgia? You go to Lake Lanier, which fortunately I live near. There's a sailboat broker nearby. So today will be the first day that I start looking at actual boats to see what's available and start developing my background understanding of what it is that I'm getting into. Figure this is going to go one of two ways. This could be the beginning of a very short story where I look into it and realize that this is perhaps maybe a very lunatic thing to think about and do after looking at actual boats, or it could be the stimulus to start really pushing things forward. Recently we just got back from an 8-day cruise down in the Caribbean. While we were in both St. Martin and St. Kitts, we had my wife and I and family had the benefit or opportunity of meeting a couple of full-time cruisers. One was an older couple, been out on the water for 9+ years, raised their son out there, spend their summers in the Caribbean and their winters in south of France. And then for a long while we sat at the shipwreck bar in St. Kitts, on the beach. Met with a guy, name was Justin if I remember correctly. He has a boat called Vagabond, and he did basically the same thing that most people you think about doing. His career had an upturn, change, got rid of everything, bought a sailboat, and that's what he does, sails around the Caribbean. And had an opportunity really to talk to him for quite a while. And he shared a lot of insight. It gave Stephanie even a little bit more motivation and excitement about the probability and possibility of this being a reality. So I'm going to start here looking at boats. So we'll see what we got. Hopefully this will be an interesting long story. That would be our inland sailboat place. According to the internet, Snug Harbor is the go-to people for sailboats on Lake Lanier. So that's where we're headed. I got a few in the yard on the lake. Lots sailboats. All quite frankly don't even know where to begin to think about it. They're all disturbingly beat up looking. They all look like they're abandoned. Sure they're not. At the beginning. Let's go inside, talk to somebody, see what we're dealing with. Perhaps one of these will be mine one day. Now, admittedly, my first impression walking around the yard there at Snug Harbor was not, let's say, enthusiastic. I was a little bit dismayed by the condition of most of the boats that were sitting there, but I've never been around sailboats. I've been on motorboats all my life, and that's what I was familiar with. And seeing boats out of the water is just completely different. But I went ahead and went on into Snug Harbor, and immediately I was met there at the front door by the owner, Ann, who kindly asked me what she could help me with. I said, well, I was looking for a sailboat and wanted to talk to somebody about that. Wanted to buy one. She goes, well, what kind? I says, well, I don't really know. She goes, well, how big? And I said, oh, 45 to 50 foot. She just looked at me, and then she turned her head and looked back to the back of the offices there and yelled, hey! We got someone who wants a big one. She took me back to the back and she introduced me to the only broker that was there, a gentleman by the name of Sid. He was kind enough. We spent an hour or so just talking about things and what I was thinking about doing. During the conversation with Sid, explaining to him that what we wanted to do was buy a sailboat, move on board, sail the Caribbean, sail the world, and understanding that I've never sailed in my entire life, that what we should do, we should get a small sailboat, learn how to sail, weekend sail on Lake Lanier, and then build up to it. He's been sailing all his life. He lives on a sailboat on Lake Lanier. He was my first expert, and I listened attentively to what he had to say and what he shared, because I wanted to start gathering information. I explained to Sid what I really wanted to do is to get out and get on some sailboats. I wanted to look at them. I wanted to get on them. I want to see what they feel like. I needed to start getting a sense of what it is that a sailboat is. And I asked him if he could take us out or take me out and show me whatever is available on Lake Lanier. And that's where I wanted to start. I wanted to just start gathering basic information and start getting a feel for this so that I can start getting a base knowledge of sailboats. So where do I start when I want to start understanding something? I start reading. I just spent about an hour with a guy by the name of Sid at Snug Harbor. Suggested that these would probably be the couple of magazines I might want to look at, Sail and Cruising. He says that's the Bible there, so dropped by my local West Marine and picked them up. I do have an appointment with Sid next week, and we're going to go out on Saturday early, 8 o'clock. And he's going to show me some boats and kind of get things going there. And then I'm going to head on over to Athens for the G-Day game, so it worked out nicely there. But I think Sid's going to be a big help, so I look forward to starting this adventure with him. The next Saturday came, so Tyler and I drove on up to Lake Lanier to meet with Sid. Lake Lanier is a man-made lake on the northern half of Georgia. It was constructed back in the late 50s. It's a primary water source for the city of Atlanta. It's roughly about 59 square miles, about 640 some odd miles of shoreline, which everything I've always heard is it's considered to be one of the largest man-made lakes in the country. Now, we also heard from Sid that it is one of the locations of the largest collections of freshwater sailboats. So it made sense that this is where we would go to start looking at boats. In my previous week's conversation with Sid, I'd shared with him that what we were looking for was a boat that we could use to sail around the Caribbean and the oceans. Initially starting off with something like a 45 or to 50 foot boat, not knowing exactly how big it was that we needed. So Sid made a point to take us to the absolute largest boat on Lake Lanier that was for sale at the time. This was a 42-foot Tiana. Now, one of the things about the boat that he shared with us before we got there was that it had sunk right there at the marina. Evidently, one of the through hulls popped or something, not sure exactly what. And they had only just brought it back up and were drying it out. But when we got on the boat, my initial thoughts were, wow, this is really big. Again, all I've ever been on is motorboats, speedboats. I mean, up to maybe 27, 30 some odd feet or something. Being on a 42-foot boat, when I looked up that mast, I was astounded at how big this was. Now, I think that it also had a little bit to do with the fact that it was sitting there in a dock, and so the scale was dramatically accentuated by everything else around it being small and tight. But the Tiana was an interesting boat, and we took our time looking it over and asking several questions about it. But it was not going to be something I was going to want to look into seriously, because wasn't even going to consider buying a boat that had been sunk. The rest of the morning, Sid took us around to the various marinas on Lake Lanier, visiting several boats, and all of them at this point in time were nothing the size of that Tiana. Every one of them was 32 foot or less, but we did take the opportunity to get inside of them, look around, experience what it was like to be in a space of that nature, reviewing the decks, looking at the sails, just kind of checking everything out and getting familiar with what the layout of a sailboat is like. Without a doubt, one of the things I came away with was recognizing that 32 feet is not a very big boat if you're going to live on it. Most of the ones that we looked at didn't have heads or didn't have showers and things of the nature that you would want to have, or at least I felt like you were going to want to have if you're going to live on it forever. But it was a great experience, and being that these were some of the first sailboats that I've ever had the opportunity to be on, I definitely was happy to have had the chance to see them with somebody who knows something about them. So in the end, it was a very good experience, and we were appreciative of the time. End of the day, headed out to Athens to see the University of Georgia Bulldogs spring day game. Well, it's a start. The seed has been planted, and all we need to do now is tend to it. You know what they say, every journey begins with one small step. I have a feeling this is going to be a lot of small steps. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to see how this Escape from Samsara unfolds. We're going to try to educate, encourage, and entertain with each video. I have a feeling this is going to be a long story. So sit right back, and you'll hear a tale.